Welcome to the story behind the glory by OnThree. And today we have the pleasure of chatting with Rusty Whitt, a former Green Beret and now currently the football strength and conditioning coach at Troy University. Rusty, how are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for coming on to our podcast. Let's dive in. Can you briefly describe your background and what inspired you to join the Army in 03?
Well, I'm from around Fort Worth, Texas. It's a town called Azle, just outside of Fort Worth, Texas. My father was in the 101st Airborne in the late 50s, early 60s, prior to Vietnam. And growing up, I was exposed to his stories of being in airborne school and being in the Army. And he learned his trade as a helicopter electrician there in the Army in the latter part of his service. And when they were adopting the Huey in the 60s, and he started working on those, and they were manufactured in Fort Worth, Texas, and just pictures of him jumping out of planes and talking about all the guys he had served with. And my grandfather was in the Army, stationed at Fort Riley in Kansas. My dad's dad, my other grandfather, was in the Army as well. So I had all this exposure growing up to it, and I was a jock. I was baseball, track, football my entire life, and didn't really have the impetus to join the military until early in my college. When my freshman year in college was when the first Gulf War occurred, and I had some friends in high school who had enlisted in the Marines, immediately with all that going on, and I felt left out. So I called my dad, and I just got put on football scholarship, and he goes, "Hey, if you enlist now, all this will be done before you got a basic training." And he was right. And so I went on, and in the entire 90s, just finishing up my college and kind of finding myself and establishing my desire to be a coach. And there I was, just coaching away. And then in the events of September 11th, 2001 occurred, and that changed everything for me. I've told this story numerous times, but I was working at Sam Houston State. I came home briefly to change to go to my teaching duties, and turn on the TV. And as we all recall, who are of age, the events happening right there on NBC, CBS, ABC, watching all that happen. My grandmother called me right there and said, "Rusty, this is your Pearl Harbor." And she was around 24 years of age when Pearl Harbor happened to her. She was one of 14 children. All of her brothers became involved in the military somehow. So when she told me that, it kind of she basically drafted me, and I felt compelled to do something. And it wasn't just an emotional decision. It had been something I thought about for a while. But I was the head strength coach at Sam Houston State, and I walked across the street and I enlisted in the Army at a strip mall there in Huntsville, Texas. So, that's the kind of short of it is how I went from being a coach, 9 years of coaching into the military.
Did your grandfather or dad have any guidance for you, or what was their perspective when you just up and went and decided this new career path?
Well, both my grandfathers had been passed away by that point, but my dad wasn't a big fan. He had mixed feelings about it, because you got to understand that age of a man going through, in the 60s with Vietnam and the buildup, and he lost friends in Vietnam, and he saw the toll still working on helicopters, bringing helicopters back from Vietnam. He had to resurface and refit, and he had a different point of view about it. And he was a bit cynical about the whole thing. And I was driven by patriotism and all of that. And I think he had a little bit of a different perspective. But once I got into it, he was proud, and when I became a Green Beret, and him being at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, he was exposed to some Green Berets when he was in, and he was very proud of that, and supportive as I progressed through that. The advice that he had emphysema, and he was not in very good health throughout the 2000s. He passed in 2013. But the one bit advice he had before I was deployed, I went and visited him. He was in the hospital on oxygen and suffering from the effects of emphysema. And he said, "Keep your head down, son. They have scopes too." So my dad always had a unique perspective on things. And, I think he saw a lot of guys who were inspired to join the military in the 60s and go to Vietnam and be heroes, and that's not how things worked out for them. And they faced a very formidable enemy that gave us hell, and I think he probably thought the same thing about the situation going on in Iraq and Afghanistan.
At OnThree, we really like to talk about, perseverance. That's one of our 3 Ps. And, certainly there are lots of challenging aspects to even getting to be a Green Beret, one of which is the Special Forces selection course. Can you talk to us about what some of the most challenging aspects were, not only physically, but mentally, and how that training may have differed from regular military training?
Yeah, that's a good question. The role of Special Forces is pretty unique, and the term Special Forces is thrown around a whole lot. There's one Special Forces, and there's lots of special operations. The Special Forces are the Green Berets. Special Operations encompasses Navy SEALs, MARSOC, Army Rangers. There's a huge umbrella, United States Special Operations Command is over all that. But Special Forces, the role early on that John F. Kennedy approved was to go into countries that were under oppressive regimes and build a small, unit, and they call it force multiplication. You train a small unit, and then they train a unit, and they train a unit, and then you take from 10 to 20 to 50 to 100, and you create a contingency by doing that. And so you have to have cultural awareness of where you're going. You operate very independently. The traditional Special Forces role is you're very independent and operating in a 12-man team in the middle of nowhere. And you have to be able to understand and comprehend the language of where you're dealing with. And so the selection process applies to that role. And how I kind of figured it out was the first part of selection is, do you physically belong here individually? As an individual, can you handle this, just the basic rigors of this job? And so for the first few days, it's a lot of individual testing and physical testing. Then you get into a part where, do you have not only the physical, but the mental capacity to handle a variety of stressors, being without food, being by yourself, doing complex map readings and land navigation, which might sound pretty simple, but they find a way of making it pretty hard. And then the last part of it is, how do you operate in a team setting? And if you're a selfish person, if you think about yourself first, you're going to get exposed very quickly in that whole system. So I thought Special Forces selection was uniquely designed and very well done, and it was an awesome experience. uh, to get to know oneself. And I quickly figured out that my main weakness was when I got frustrated, I would just lash out and get pissed off and want to break, knock a tree down or something, and go man on fire, and that's not what they're looking for. And you're not. And they had the course design where if you get frustrated and you get angry, hey, they're just going to say, hey, you're not a fit. So my brick wall was, the solo land navigation. You're going for around 40 to 50 miles over the course of 3 days, and you can't use a white light to read your map. You can't even be seen moving with a red light. You have to park, cover yourself up, and hide, and use your red light to read your map. And you can't navigate with any kind of light. And it's kind of like your grandpa says. I walked uphill to school, both ways in the knee deep snow. Well, that's what selection was like for me, because it was snow, knee deep, and carrying a wet rucksack, which went from 55 to about 80 pounds. And you have a time hack, and you have to keep all your equipment in order. And it was just a difficult time. And I found out a lot about myself, about having to maintain composure when you're stressed out. And I thought it was a fantastic course. And like the old song says, 100 men will test today, but only 3 get the Green Beret, or only 3 win the Green Beret, as the song says. From the beginning of the process to the end, the odds are not that far, that extreme, but they're pretty close. I would say probably 10 out of 100, 15 out of 100. So they do a very good job of exposing people. And some of the best athletes, were the first to leave. They couldn't handle the frustration aspect, the loneliness, being by yourself, doing these field problems, because you're used to having somebody to complain with, or, lean on or help you out. Well, a lot of that, you were by yourself. So it was, I can still recall those nights where, you're walking and you feel trees around you, and you got this rucksack, and you're trying to maintain a heading, and you're bumping into trees and bushes, and it was physically and mentally taxing. And to have accomplished that is something that everybody's pretty proud of.
Can you recall for us a moment where, you lost your composure, you sort of fell back on your weakness that you said? And what was that moment, in the selection course process? And how did you sort of rewire your thinking to mitigate, this Achilles heel that you had?
Well, that's a great question. Without revealing too much about it, I don't want to spoil it. And you're there's an unwritten rule about divulging too much, because they want it to be a kind of a surprise for the candidates. But
Sure.
We long movement, and 30, around 45 kilometers. And we had walked through a swamp, as Camp McCall out there in North Carolina has plenty of swamps and draws and low water areas. And we didn't change our socks, which I had been kind of like, hey, we need to change our socks. We were pressing for time. And we had a medic we had about a 14-man team we're moving with. One of our medics was a staff sergeant who had been in Mogadishu during the events of Black Hawk Down. So 11 years prior, he was a young, like 19-year-old medic that was along with the Ranger Regiment there in Mogadishu. So he had seen some pretty awful stuff over the period of his career early on as a young man, And we were allowed to stop and take about a 10-minute break. And I felt like I was walking in fire. My feet were just completely lit up. I never have experienced that before. That feeling of what was going on with my feet. So I got him over there, and he had a red lens headlamp, and he goes, "Let me look at your feet." And he pulled my boots off. I had the old black Cadillacs. Anybody who's watching this, 2000, 3, 4, 5 era, we were wearing the old black Cadillac boots. He pulls my boots off, and I had some Thorlo hiking socks, and he pulled my socks off and degloved my entire foot. All the skin came off from my lower shin to my toes. They call it degloving. And I was like shocked by the sight of it, because it was like, Captain America, the red-faced bad guy, it was like, that's what my feet looked like. And he goes, "Yeah, this is pretty bad." And I said, "What is it?" He goes, "Blistering, really bad." And he pulled out a Gerber tool, and he cut the toe box of my boot, and he cut the heel, and he goes, "Here, I made your size 12s a size 13. And I said, "What's this mean?" I said, "Am I done?" I said, "Am I done?" I asked the medic this. "Am I done?" He goes, "What do you mean, are you done?" I said, "Am I done?" He goes, "Are you going to quit?" I asked, "I don't want to quit." He goes, "Well, then don't quit." He goes, "They're blisters. They're bad blisters, but don't quit over blisters." He goes, "Nobody quits over blisters." I had a pair of socks, as we kept our socks in a Ziploc bag with foot powder in it. And he grabs my socks and he throws them on my chest. He goes, "Put some new socks on." And just walked away, And it was basically like, "Suck it up, buttercup," And I wasn't the only one in that position, but I had never seen that level of blistering before on somebody's feet. And he goes, "Yeah, it's going to hurt, but just keep stepping. Just keep stepping." And that was a very impactful time. That 5 minutes of evaluation that he gave me was like, I was like, okay, so this is how the big boys do it, And that helped me. That helped me a lot. And so that was one moment that I can reflect on during selection. And I was like, hey, you're in this for the long haul. And, as long as you can move, you're not going to quit,
I want to ask you, I recently read Angela Duckworth's book entitled Grit.
Oh, yeah.
And, she says that grit is the number one determinant of success. What are your thoughts around that statement?
I think it's spot on. I've read that book. I've read The Culture Code. I'm a huge, huge fan of that book that Duckworth wrote. And I'm actually doing a presentation today with our football team about adversity. And I got 5 minutes. I got 8 slides, and I got to go through it quick. But, you look at, and you have to keep the topic current. And I'm talking about what Kobe Bryant, some things that Chris Paul has said recently, things that Kobe Bryant talked about back in his career, that adversity is a part of life, and those who handle it are going to be successful, and those overwhelmed by it won't. And therein lies grit, the grit to persevere. I have on a grease board in my weight room, I have the term is the grittiest of the gritty. And I have that written down, and nobody can erase it. It's just like, I drew a line, keep this here. So we're going to be the grittiest of the grittiest team, and I coached at West Point, and I know what those young men and women go through up there, and their schedule, and having to play competitive Division I sports along with what they do. And so I do know a little bit about what a gritty athlete looks like. And so it's keeping your head up when things suck. It's, you're 2 a.m. and you lost a road game, and you're coming back from Hawaii, and you're still polite to the flight attendants. You tell the pilot, thank you. You help out people getting their bags off the plane. Your body language is strong. It's not meek and negative and pathetic and sad and feel sorry for me and seeking self-pity. grit, there's a lot of aspects to it. And when someone's talking to you, you look at them and you don't yawn in their face. You follow instructions. When you're down 12 points in the fourth quarter and there's 8 minutes left and you still got a chance, you're not quiet. You're clapping, saying, "Hey, keep believing, keep believing, keep believing." There's so many aspects of grit you can talk about for a long time, but in this culture and this modern age of athletes, that's kind of my role, is to enforce that. Anybody can make any strength coach can make somebody tired. Okay, I can make up a program and smoke the shit out of, pardon my French, I can smoke anybody, right? But getting people to believe in themselves when times are tough and to push through adversity and not just get frustrated and throw their hands up, there's some teaching involved in that. And I feel like that's a big part of my role.
I want to ask you, Rusty, going back, when you were, with your team, as a Green Beret, how did you help others on your team develop that mental resiliency? Or was it just, hey, if everyone had it to be part of that team? And was there a moment where you were either coached or given that little pep talk to keep that mental resiliency?
That's a good question. I entered my team as a 34-year-old. Maybe I was even 35. I was as old as our team sergeant, and your team sergeant is your team daddy who's been in the Army for 15 years or more. And walking in the door as a coach with a master's degree and all this other blah, blah, and not having a lot of military experience. And our team sergeant had enlisted, when I thought about it in college, he just graduated high school, and he enlisted when the 82nd Airborne went to sniper school and went to the Persian Gulf as a sniper. So we had parallel lives, and he chose this route, and then we intersected, that many years later. And I'm not going to say that he had ill will, but it was like, he's like, "Hey, what brought you here is cool and all." He goes, "But you need to just to listen and not talk very much, so kind of be seen and not heard without being condescending, And he's like, "You got a lot to learn," because and there again, I'm with guys in their late 20s who had been in the military 8, 9, 10 years, had been to Ranger School, had been to, that had been to Sapper School, these guys, Scuba, Halo, all these guys had been through all this stuff. And I'm walking in the door with my fresh SF tab, And so a lot of that was just kind of observe and learn and ask good questions and shut up most of the time, But and then I had two more younger echoes, the communication guys, come underneath me, and I was tasked with giving those guys jobs and organizational duties and whatnot. And they were a lot younger than me, 10, 15 years younger. And so there I was like, "Hey, let's be consistent. Let's have a daily checklist, be organized." You're given about $200,000 worth of communications equipment on an SF team. It's probably twice that now. And you had to keep up with every tiny little aspect because, one of my very first counseling sessions with the team sergeant was like, "Hey, as a SF communications sergeant, we live and die by comms. Literally, our lives are at stake if you can make comms or not. And if you got a battery that's not working here or a setting off there, people die, And he quickly made me understand how important it was to do our checklists and to make sure everything was working properly. I had everything. So we would practice daily on this stuff, And one of the youngest of our echoes was way better at computers and programming than I was. So he shared some information. But I think what I was helpful in that is that I had a strong background in fitness and strength and conditioning. I made programs for a lot of the guys who had bad backs, who were feeling the effects of 10 or 15 years of service. And it wasn't, hey, let's go squat a bunch of weight. It was, things they could do to actually make them feel better. So I tried to use my strengths. My dad used to tell me, hey, be useful. And so my knowledge base was the conditioning realm, was the dietary realm and all that. So I tried to use that to help out the best that I could. And then as far as just being reliable and having a consistent schedule, I think I helped out with that with my younger guys. But that's about it early on.
I'm curious, as a communications sergeant, what is maybe what are a few of the underappreciated skill sets or disciplines that come with that role that people may not appreciate?
That's interesting. Yeah, you mean you get sent to these places and you're having to deal with communications equipment that might be from the 80s, 70s. If you get sent to Africa, there's no telling. It might be some British equipment from the 60s or 70s, and you're having to figure it out and make it work. And underappreciated skill sets would just be basic computer programming. You get these computers, maybe probably old laptops from the 90s or something, and you're supposed to make that stuff work until you get refitted. The turnover process, and having to encrypt your communication, it can get pretty complicated early on until you get, we had to hang up antennas and create antenna wire. We made a jungle antenna, early on in our deployment in Iraq to talk to our FOB warhorse up in northern Iraq. About 20 miles away. We had to. It's called a Kahlua jungle antenna. Very interesting little device. We made that, and nobody else knew what the hell we were doing. It was kind of cool. We're looking at our little commo books, kind of geeking out on that stuff. But I'm a caveman, knucklehead, knuckle dragging weightlifter, and then having to learn all these communication skills. It was outside the box for me. I thought I would probably be a better weapons sergeant, but I had to they shoved a round peg in a square hole with me, making me a commo sergeant. So I leaned on the younger guy who was the computer nerd, and we made it all work. But underappreciated was the very first night that I got there, and the outgoing Echo. We were replacing a National Guard team, and he had the Echo there had actually been one of our instructors early on in my course, and we had 5 gun trucks that needed to be ready at 6 a.m. to go on a route familiarization tour. And he said, hey, I got 5 PST-5 Delta satellite radios in those 5 trucks, and I got 5 conventional force radios, just regular old radios. I need you to program all the frequencies and all the crypto. And it's 2 a.m. now, and I'm going to come check on you at 5. And he gave me 3 hours to jump in all these trucks and get all this stuff going, and do comms checks with the house radio. And it was stressful, but he wanted to see if I could handle the stress of that task. And at that time I was by myself. I had no help. I was on the Advon team, and so yeah, I got thrown into that, and I was able to get through it. And it was the level of training that we had got me through that. So it was a confidence boost. It was a test, and I knew nobody else there could speak the language. So yeah, that's it brings back some memories.
I wanted to ask you, and focus on, teamwork and teammates for a second. When you look back on your experience, who, or you don't have to say who the person is, but who was your best teammate in the moment? And reflecting back, would it still be that person?
I had a medic friend of mine. I won't tell him. I won't tell his name. He was the senior 18 Delta, and he and I loved to go snow skiing. He was a boarder. I was a skier, and we had developed, because he was new to the team. He and I arrived within about 2 weeks of each other. I got there about 2 weeks later. He showed up, so we were in the same situation. And we walked into our team in 10th Special Forces group, and they had come back from Iraq. And if you can imagine 12 guys who spent over 250 days in a sustained gunfight, 250 days, they were involved in a gunfight. And they came back. Well, while they were over there, the team sergeant got killed in a roadside bomb. And they came back, and one of the warrant officers ended his own life because of some things that were going on. And so if you can imagine the kind of close-knit group these guys had become to all of this, all this adversity, okay? And then here comes me. I walk in the door, and they weren't too receptive, and I can understand why. And then a week later, my medic friend shows up. Well, we were on the outside looking in on that team culture, okay? And we formed a bond, kind of a bond of, hey, we're trying to help each other to get through this and get accepted and become part of this team. And so anyway, yeah, it was him. And he and I witnessed him do something truly heroic in Iraq, heroic and selfless. And I watched it with my own eyes right there in front of me. And he ran across a road that was getting hit by PKM machine gun fire to save the life of one of our Iraqi soldiers that we had been training. Was shot in the wrist in a radial artery by a sniper from a Dragunov about 300 yards away. And it was a team with a Dragunov, a PKM, and an AK. 3 guys were shooting at us. And this guy and we don't even know how old he was. He was probably 15, 16 years of age. He was laying in a doorway holding his arm. We could see the arterial blood coming out of his arm, and he was probably 20 yards away from us. But between us and him was an open dirt street with PKM bullets hitting the street. And he goes, I've always wanted to say this. And I said, what? And he goes, I'm going in, like a Hollywoodism, And he just runs across the street, high knee, his M4 bouncing, and he's trying to control all of his equipment running. And he's got this big med bag on his back. Anybody watching this who's a Delta or was a Delta knows the size of that aid kit. And he's running across this street, and we're all shooting, trying to provide some cover. And he made it over there and put a tourniquet on the guy and saved his life. And it was pretty remarkable, And I tell him that story, and he's like, he's way over it, didn't mean anything at the time, doing his job, all that kind of stuff. So you learn from that. You learn from how he even handles it now, the humility that he has and the humble attitude. And so, yeah, a lot of that, a lot of things bring back some deep friendships, from those kind of times.
And before we move on, I want to interview, as you've done athletics, into this experience here. Can you talk to me about one of the silent, I'm just going to get it done leaders on your team who really doesn't want the spotlight, doesn't want it talked about, but is just, there for others and totally selfless?
On the football team right now?
Yeah.
Kamani Vidal. I think that'd be probably the number one answer from any of our coaches. He's a running back that set the all-time single game rushing record last week in our first game. Quick story about Kamani Vidal, and this will sum up a lot, was in 2021. January 2021, we're going through off season, and he comes up to me on a Monday and he goes, "Coach, but I had a death in my family. I need to go to a funeral in Atlanta." I said, "Sure, come on, yeah, I understand." But I want to miss any of my workouts. I said, "Well, family first, you got to do what you got to do." And we had a 4-day lift. We had a 4-day lift scheduled and 3 runs of the week. He goes, "Well, I want to make up my workouts." He goes, "How about I do a double day today, a double day tomorrow morning, and leave maybe Wednesday morning and do 2 runs on Tuesday?" I said, "That's a lot of work, Kamani. It's, you know." So he does a double day on Monday, does a team run, and then he comes in on Tuesday morning and he does a double day lift. And during that span of time, I figure out that the death in his family was Hank Aaron, the Hall of Fame baseball player, who was like his granduncle. And I was like, "Come on, whoa. Hey, man, go to Atlanta right now." So how many people would have said, "This happened. This is who it was. I need a break. I'm out of here," But his humility and humble-mindedness and willingness to do the entire week in 2 days says a whole lot about the kind of guy that he is. And when he does speak, he's kind of like the, walk quietly and carry a big stick, He doesn't talk a whole lot, but when he does, it's something pretty profound, So, and Kamani's work ethic is unmatched. I mean, he's just an exceptional human being.
Yeah, I want to transition, thank you for that, to your transition, back to personal life, post-military service. And how do you balance that and relationships and reentry? Yeah, I know you've talked a little bit about, your medic friend, and you have a little bit of reminiscing there. But can you share with us more on, the balancing of military and personal life, especially on, reentry?
I was terrible at it, and my ex-wife will agree. When I joined the Army, we got engaged right before I enlisted, and she didn't quite understand what we were in for, nor did I. And basically, I was in the Army for 6 years, and we spent 6 years living in different states. She was in Texas, and I was in Georgia, North Carolina, Colorado, Iraq, Colorado, back. And it was overwhelming for both of us. And when I got out, there were certain expectations that she had that I didn't quite understand, or if I had understood, I was probably too selfish, because all I wanted to do is get my career back on track. And I put my career ahead of her and my family in general. And I was not very good at the transition. And maybe I was a little bit arrogant that, hey, I did all this, I deserve to have this, when you come back. And it rubs people the wrong way, So, and then there was, hey, I deserve a job, hey, I did all this stuff, I deserve it. No, you don't. You really don't. You get what you deserve. There's a lot of coaches who've been coaching a long time, and you can't just take 6 years out, come back, and think you're going to get back into it. So I had some help. From coaching friends of mine who helped me get back my foot in the door, and it was at a lower position, and I had to work myself back into it. So that was humbling in itself right there. And I've talked to a lot of Green Berets who are currently about to get out, and I try to counsel them about the missteps that I made and how to prepare themselves to get back into a normal life. And yeah, I wasn't very good at that initially, but looking back on it, the organizational skills that you're going to have from being in an SF, the planning, the intensity, because never been a more, sense of urgency in athletic programs than it is right now with like in college and in professional ranks. But I'm familiar with college, with the win now attitude. You know, you got to win now because you can you get transfers, the NIL, you can pay players basically, and you know the developmental window is not 4 years anymore. It's now about 2 years or a year and a half or one semester. So the sense of urgency that SF people are used to having is very beneficial. Being able to teach, because you know most Green Berets are good instructors, so you can, you know, it's focused on the positive. What you can do is being able to communicate complex information, and so there's a big role for them out there. I don't really, at the time, I didn't know anybody who had been coach SF back into coaching, and I only know a few now. So I kind of was on my own with that, and social media and ways of linking weren't quite in 2009 when I was getting out, weren't the same. So live and learn on a lot of that stuff. But there are certain skills that if you can, that you're coming out, that can definitely help you. But the survivor's guilt that some guys might have, the post-traumatic issues that some guys might have, you got to get some help on that. You got to talk, you got to get some counseling on it. I'm not saying pop medicine or anything, but a very beneficial, am I going too long? But a very
No, you're good. You're good.
Beneficial trip that I kind of brought things around for me was spending 2 weeks with the Australian SAS and the Australian Commandos. I went down to Sydney for 2 weeks back in 2016. They are far, at the time, 2016, they were far in advance with how to handle soldiers in transition and soldiers they were trying to keep on, because the population of Australia is 25 million, so their talent pool for special operations is pretty small. So they don't want guys to leave. They want to keep them in. And then when guys do leave, they want to make sure that they are they are sound and they can live a healthy life. So the points that they made to me, and they wrote down on a grease board, was in transition, or even if you're still in, to maintain a healthy mindset, you have to have social engagement. I'm writing this down. Social engagement, physical activity must match your competitive level, which SF are, usually type A, very active, very competitive people. And then you have to have intellectual stimulation. So socially engaged, physically active and healthy in the physical realm, and then intellectual stimulation. And was one of those missing, you're going to have problems. Well, I had not quite, when I was shown that, and we're talking, 7 years after I'd gotten out of the military, it just really hit me like, I got to doing the physical thing, not really doing much intellectual stimulation, and my social engagement is just where I work, and I've let and in my social engagement with my ex-wife, that's the reason I have an ex-wife, because I let that slide, and I didn't work on that aspect, and so I kind of saw the reasons that I dug the hole that I was in, So I've been championing that everywhere that I go, and there's an organization out of Colorado Springs called Green Beret Racing, and they had this figured out, and they do that, and they have a motorcycle club with Green Berets riding dirt bikes and racing, and they do dirt track, cars and race cars and all kind dune buggy racing, and they do all kinds of things, and they got it. They have it figured out, but it took us a little bit longer to figure that out, and it took me too long to figure it out.
You're right, and I want to ask you about the socialization piece. Is that tough for vets in today's world to find that socialization piece? Because on one hand, you got all the social media tools, right? But I would imagine that you just can't talk to anybody to re-enter socially and get that sort of feeling of satisfaction, fulfillment, help that you need to re-enter.
I think there's a big trust component, that's you have to establish, and guys are really guarded coming out. They put a lot of thought into what they're trying to do, and they're guarded, and they don't want to reveal too much and seem too sensitive. There's a stigma that veterans getting out have something wrong with them. They got PTSD. They can't function normally. They have, something must be wrong. Which I think is crap. There's a lot of resilient people getting out of the military who's been through a lot of shit, and they're okay. They can handle it. But I think there's just some tentativeness about who to talk to, who to trust, and if they went right into the military out of high school, and now they're trying to get a job and they don't have the collegiate requirements, there can be some problems with that, trying to navigate continuing education and all of that. So yeah, there's a lot of stumbling blocks out there. There's some good organizations out there to help though. Like I said, the Green Beret Racing is a big one out there. The Black Rifle Coffee is that a lot of these, there's some really cool organizations out there that are helping. Task Force Dagger deals with veterans who have traumatic brain injury, and the roadside bombs and the training and the flashbangs and all the stuff that your SF personnel is exposed to. You're going to have some issues, and you got they're not binding, deal breaking things. You just have to work through them and be, like you said, resilient. So if that helps, answer your question a little bit. But yeah, there's anybody that wants to get in the coaching profession out of college, call me. Maybe give my contact information. I know coaches all over the country. If you want to get involved in the strength and conditioning aspect with coaching soldiers, I know a lot of people involved in that. If you need help trying to figure out what you want to do from an education standpoint, I can definitely help that too. And I'm not the only one out there that can do that. So, but I want to help. I feel there's a calling out there for those guys in transition, and I don't want them to stumble over the same hurdles that I did.
Yeah, well, let me ask you, Rusty, is there something that you'd like to see for, is there work to be done for the family members of vets to help them with that reentry process as well? We've talked a lot about the vets specifically, but whether it's the children or the spouse.
Yeah, I mean, people are very hesitant to go to seek help somewhere with people they don't know. The VA is not the answer. It's usually just going to resolve, come down to friendship groups. And I talked to the guys at Green Beret Racing, and they, like I said, it's a hell of an organization. They, when I was in the Army, they had the morale, welfare, and recreation department at any base. But it's usually things that SF guys, Rangers, Navy SEALs aren't going to be interested in going bowling or taking white bowling, or some of these, kind of really mellow things. They want to go rock climbing or skiing or deep sea fishing or something to get a little bit of a stimulation, And I've always thought it'd be cool if there was a satellite network of organizations that operated like a morale welfare rec for veterans state by state, but you did cooler things than just go bowling or play tennis or golf, maybe it would be you go on a mission trip to Haiti or something, to help people out. SF guys want to help, know how to help, have cultural awareness. Maybe you go to a foreign country somewhere and you do something, a mission trip, or you go climb a mountain in Alaska or something. You do some cool things and create and sustain that bond. But like I said, my family, my wife took a back seat to my return to my career and all of that. So, and my communication was not very good with any of that. So, it's a great question, man. The suicide rate is astronomical with veterans getting out, and I have my own theories of why that's happening, but we're not really making a dent in it. With all these, different organizations, we're still struggling with it. And I think someone that I know committed suicide 2 weeks ago, and you have to be willing to swallow your pride and seek help and talk and not just hold everything in. And that inward guilt, that inward ultimately despisal for oneself is what usually leads the finger to the trigger. So a lot of it falls on the individual themselves, if that makes sense. To seek that help, to communicate, to call somebody that you trust and say, hey man, I'm having a bad night. And even I would have a hard time calling my medic friend and revealing that, because he's a resilient bastard, man. And I don't want to show weakness to that, but I know he would be receptive to it and put his arms around me, so to speak. So I don't think that, to put some of the blame on the ones that are actually harming themselves, we've got to actually think about the harm we're doing to others, what you leave behind. And, the mother, the mom, the dad, the cousin, the wife, whoever, the children, whoever you're leaving behind, you've got to stop and think before that happens, man, before you end it. So not to get really super heavy, but you just kind of push the button on that.
No, I mean, in what you're saying, it really sounds like, if more programs could be out there that fit the personalities of these vets, the high activity, type A activities, the opportunities to give back, to educate, to teach, if there could be more organizations that dial in, and make them sort of feel welcome, like, hey, I've got skills that are a great match for this or that organization or opportunity.
Yeah.
So,
there are people out there trying. I mean, the Virginia High Performance, you may have heard of them. They're trying. They have a Navy SEAL base of people that are trying to get healthy lifestyles going with veterans, offering coaching opportunities and things like that. So it is out there. I just think that the system is kind of overwhelmed when you have 20 plus years of experienced operators and soldiers and airmen and Task Force 160 pilots, whoever it might be, who've been through some crazy stuff, getting out and not having a very good support structure. There's just the VA system is not the answer. It's got to be blown up and start and rebuilt. So yeah, I mean, again, I don't want to complain about a situation and not have a resolution. All I can say is if anybody out there wants to talk about it, I've got ideas, and I've offered internships for those in the military, and I've had some interns come through with military experience. I've helped some guys who want to coach at the high school level get contacts. So we just got to do a better job of communicating and finding some the next step on the ladder, and getting a handhold. The old saying is you would have 3 points of contact when you're climbing a ladder. Well, I know I can help get at least 1 point of contact in there, but people have to have the willpower to keep moving.
Rusty, the last question I have for you is, I know you said you had some ideas on how to help vets. If people out there in our audience are listening, what would be one of the top ideas that you would want to share with a listener for how you could help them?
Help them do what exactly? Let's get
Yeah, I mean, if they said, hey, we're coming back home, we're looking to re-enter. Rusty, give us one of your top ideas that you could help implement with me or suggest.
Well, depending on their education level, I would encourage them. I think we have a drastic shortage of good teachers in this country. I would encourage them to seek a high school teaching certificate and be a coach and be a mentor and teach at the high school level or junior high level. And I know I could help get their foot in the door at a variety of places in Texas or Alabama or Louisiana. I know high school coaches all over the place, Oklahoma. I know I'm kind of working on getting a guy a job down in South Alabama right now, former SF guy, which might work out for him. But, hopefully they've had it. They're open to the idea of getting an educational background if they haven't already. And, SF guys, man, or Rangers, all the special operations community, dudes are just awesome. What they've been through and the resiliency they usually have, the stories they have, what they've been through. People are fascinated by that, and you can get their attention. And shit, man, the hardest thing to do right now is get a 20-year-old athletic or a 20-year-old athlete's attention because they got their cell phone in their face and they got 5,000 things going on. And, today I got a 5-minute presentation that would have been 15 minutes 20 years ago. Hey, you only got 5 because that's all we have of these guys. But SF, special operations, Navy SEALs, they can get somebody's attention because from the onset of them stepping on in the basic training or the boot camp where they started out, they have stories of resilience and teamwork and learning under stress, and they make great educators. So that would be my main advice, is to seek a job in the education sector. And if that's not of interest to them, that's kind of my main, my main point in life right now. And there's a lot of other things they could certainly do, but if their bodies are still able to be a firefighter or something like that. But yeah, I mean, my brother's been a firefighter for 35 years, and he has so much free time. He has a side job, and a side living, and doing pretty good. So I could give some advice, take it or leave it.
Well, fantastic. Well, Rusty, you've been awfully generous with your time, and I wish you good luck with that, 5-minute presentation this afternoon. And we'll
tell the audience, if you want to reach out to me in any way, at Rusty Whitt, Instagram, RUSTYWHITT at Rusty Whitt. Probably the fastest way to link up. My email is rustywitt@yahoo.com, so it's pretty easy to shoot me an email. So I'd be happy to talk to anybody.
I love it. Well, thank you, Rusty, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of The Story Behind the Glory. Stay up to date with OnThree for our latest episodes by following OnThree on social media at OnThree Stories.